Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Kassia and I spoke to Alice Fishburn, the editor of the FT Weekend magazine at the newspaper's offices in London.
I give her a massive promotion in the opening moments of the show when I describe her as the editor of the FT Weekend, but rectify that by talking more about how the magazine itself fits into all the FT's offerings and also how it fits into the wider ecosystem of magazine journalism, both here and across the Atlantic.
In particular, we discussed a couple of recent stories with her, one about peanut allergies and the other about the potential impact of automation on long-distance truck drivers.
Both those pieces are a lot more fascinating than they sound, and in particular I loved the opening of the peanut allergy piece. That is incredibly heartrending. We'll put links to both those pieces in the show notes beneath the episode on iTunes, and we really hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. I'm here in a wonderful office at the FT Weekend with Alice Fishburn, who is the editor of the FT Weekend. And
I'm the editor of the FT Weekend magazine.
FT Weekend magazine.
Just promoted me up several levels.
We have Alice Fishburn, editor of the FT Weekend magazine, not the FT Weekend. And we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your career thus far.
Yeah, can you just start out by telling us how you got your entry into journalism and how you made your way to the FT and then to what you're doing at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. I started doing journalism in college, really. I went to university where there was a college newspaper, and I did about 2 days there and absolutely loathed it. And then stumbled across this slightly renegade magazine that was being published across a bunch of colleges in America where I was. And loved it. It was really scrappy. We basically had no idea what we were doing, but I just really enjoyed the combination of visuals and longer form pieces and writers coming in from all over the country. And I did that in college. And then after college, I thought, I'll try and pursue this. And I managed to get a equivalent of a graduate traineeship. It wasn't called that, but at Newsweek in New York, which I did for a year. Then I went to grad school. Brief sideline, and then I moved back to the UK and was lucky enough to be taken on at the Times on their comment desk. At the time I was managing their online blogs. Danny Finkelstein had Comment Central. I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was really pioneering. I mean, it was when blogs were just starting out and it was before the paywall. It had a huge readership and it was great fun, actually. It was brilliant training, and I then sort of hopscotched around the Times for 3 or 4 years. I was in the newsroom for a bit, on the comment desk for a bit. Eventually ended up at Eureka, which was their science magazine, which was just lovely and much lamented, it sadly is no more. And that taught me a lot about being in a magazine environment, about presentation, about really selling long form pieces on particularly arcane subjects. In that case, it was all science, so it was some very, very knotty stuff, but how you sell that to a popular audience. And then from there, I was hired into FT Weekend Mag 7 years ago, I think, as Sue Mathias's deputy, and have been here ever since. And when she left about 2 years ago, I took over. It's a great place to be.
Just a couple of follow-ups to that. So are you British, but you went to university in the States?
I am British, yes.
Okay, but yeah. you went to college in the US?
Confusingly, yes.
Okay, that makes more sense.
So we've heard a little bit about how you've kind of came to the FT. Was it somewhere that you'd wanted to work for a long time? Was it something that had been on your radar, or was it just that, an opening came up?
An opening came up, and that was, I don't think I would have applied to work here beforehand because, for one thing, I'm not a corporate reporter and I'd never had any real business reporting experience. I'd been a general news reporter, but nothing financial. But I'd always admired it. I mean, I think that the FT has an amazing, amazing breadth of international reporters. We've got correspondents all over the place, and our international reporting is just great. And I'd seen that as an outsider. And I'd also seen, some of the long form stuff they'd been doing, and they were relaunching the magazine at that point, and I thought it was a really exciting opportunity to
And did the magazine
something.
call to you because of that first initial experience where you'd sort of thought about, where you initially became attracted to journalism?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've never really lost that slightly mad, chaotic college deadline mentality. I'm sure that some of my team wish that I had. But I think that there is something about that. I mean, I do think that magazines, because you have the visual aspect as well as the words and all of the other digital, etc. components of our age, you get all of that, and it's great. And I've always loved that. And the FT offered me a fantastic opportunity. I'm really glad I took it. And
following on from Kassia's question, where does the magazine kind of fit into the broader package that the paper has, both with the news coverage and within the weekend paper in particular, with books and arts and so forth?
Well, FT Weekend is a bit of a different beast to the daily paper. I mean, the audiences are actually quite different. There is some overlap, obviously, but they are substantially different audiences. And the magazine, I mean, we like to think of it as being an integral part of FT Weekend. It gives us an opportunity to really run long-form stuff. Most of the long-form pieces, there's obviously the lunch interview in Life and Arts, and then there's our cover and our second feature, and those are the big ones. I think that it's very popular online as well with the weekday audience as well as the weekend audience. People save our articles to read them. They like the fact that it's often reporters that they know from the daily paper, but going deeper into a subject that they already know very, very well. And yeah, we get good figures, really.
Just a sort of a follow-up question to that, you talked about the difference between the readership for the week and the weekend offerings. Could you sort of describe the difference between the flavour? I mean, is there a different flavour, or is it just sort of, is it by design or by accident that you have this sort of different readership, and is that reflected in the content itself, or is that just, different people like it at the weekend?
I mean, I think it's that at the weekend people aren't going to want to sit down with hard business news in the same way that they do during the week. Obviously, it's often the same writers, but we present it in a very different way. We don't just do business stuff. In fact, that's quite a small percentage of our makeup. We've got a very strong arts team. We do a lot of kind of long-form international reporting or social, cultural, health, all that sort of thing. I mean, I think we want the same level of intelligence and the same rigor of reporting, but we want it in a way that you can read over your breakfast table or on the sofa on a Sunday afternoon. And, we know that our readers in the week are quite time poor. They're not going to want to sit down with 4,000 words, but we hope that they'll see it being promoted and they'll think, oh yes, I'll save that one for the weekend, or they'll buy us on the weekend to have that experience.
And obviously you were a deputy at the FT Weekend magazine before you became editor. What is your sort of editorial, it sounds incredibly fancy and a bit stupid, but what is your editorial vision for the magazine? What did you come in wanting to do?
My vision. Yes.
It does sound ridiculous. I can't think of a better way.
Get it out every week and then get the next one out. No, I mean, I think that Sue Mathias, who was the previous editor, was a fantastic editor, and she brought me in and nurtured me in many ways. And so we both had a vision of offering intelligent, long form, a breadth of subjects, stuff that's beautiful to look at, food recipes you want to go and do, a real mix of something that caters for everyone in the household at the weekend. And I'd say, I in particular am aware of the fact that the FT's audience is very global. We tend to be quite internationally focused in what we cover. We don't tend to just do UK stuff. We have a fair amount of big name interviews, but it's not celeb-y in any way, really. Sometimes we maybe could be more celeb-y. But yeah, it's just offering something that challenges people, that makes them think, that's intelligent. And I just think people, they don't want dumbed down stuff at the weekends. They want the same stuff they want in the week, but just at a more leisurely pace and something that they can explore in a way they maybe couldn't if they were sitting at their desk.
I think it's so funny how often long form comes up and people's passion for long form comes up in these conversations. But is there sort of, obviously in a magazine you need sort of a good pace and rhythm. How do you balance the sort of the longer pieces you do with the shorter pieces, and how does that mix work in the FT magazine?
Well, writers will always file as much as you give them plus 1,000 words, I find. So we're constantly, giving people word counts. I mean, I think our cover story and our second feature tend to run fairly long, but we have a number of other slots that are designed to be shorter, because I completely agree with you. People want a mix of things, and they might want a shorter personal essay, which could come in at 1,500 words or something, a column, 800 words, as well as the big 4,000, 5,000 word pieces. We also have a really, really talented photo team here, and we do a lot of photography stories, which I think work really well and provide a great break in the mix. I mean, it's funny because nowadays you're obviously thinking about what works in print, and then that's a completely different way of reading to what works online. So you are sort of in a 2-track mode all the time in terms of your mix. But I do think it's important to have a lot of variety.
I'd like to talk a little bit about one of your recent longer pieces, which was about the science of peanut allergies, which I found completely fascinating. One of my really good friends was incredibly allergic to all kinds of nuts growing up and is now becoming less allergic. But I found it really interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about it, how it came about, and what the process was, sort of bringing it through the magazine to publication?
Yeah, of course. Well, David Crow, who wrote the piece for us, is an FT writer, and he's a very, very good writer and a very good reporter, and we've done several things with him in the past, although I think this is his biggest one to date. And he came to me with the idea, and like you, I know several people who have allergies, if not peanut, other nuts, other kinds of things. And I think that everyone is just fascinated by the fact that these are such a thing now. And if you have kids, you know, your kids' schools are briefing you all the time on it. It's just something that wasn't around when I was growing up, and everyone wants to know why. And David was saying, well, there are these two potential cures being touted. They're both about to go up for FDA approval. This is a good time to do it. We could look at those, and it's a great story. And I just thought, yeah, absolutely. This is a cover. You know, sometimes you can tell from the beginning. This is definitely, in fact, I could almost just sort of see the peanut on the cover from the beginning. And he went off and did it. You know, it was all in finding the stories, obviously finding the scientists, but also, I mean, if you've read the piece, you'll know there's a very, very sad opening with the mother of a child who dies of a peanut allergy. And it's just absolutely, I mean, when he filed the first draft, I started reading it and I actually had to stop because it was the end of the day, and I thought, I can't. This needs more of my attention than I can give it in the next hour. And yeah, he just did a fantastic job. And it was interesting because when it went up online, our comments, you know, we had people writing into us saying, make this free. You know, we need this is actually a public service, because people don't know about these things. They don't know about the cures necessarily. It's an area that there's not a huge amount of information available and lots of conflicting things being said. So we did.
With something like that, and I suppose it's a broader issue for the FT in general, given what it covers, but how do you steer a line between the kind of technicality that you go into and making something legible for a general, well-informed lay reader? Do you have a sort of threshold of...
Yeah, we do, absolutely. And it is tricky because obviously we do have quite a specialised readership, and, you know, they're very, very smart on all things business. Our weekend readership is slightly different, but nonetheless, we don't want to appear as though we're patronising them, but at the same time, we need to make sure that people who aren't business readers and pick something up are aware of what's going on. So I do spend quite a lot of time talking to writers about getting that balance right, and where to be technical and where to pull back a little bit and give the bigger picture, or get a sort of more general commentary from someone that might be a little bit more illuminating for people who don't know that particular area.
And how is the weekend audience different? What's the demographic of it? Is it bigger, or?
It is a slightly bigger audience than the weekday audience, but it's just the overlap of readers it's just not the same eyeballs, basically. Okay. I mean, the actual demographic differences aren't enormously pronounced, at least as far as I know, but it's just not the same. We just know it's not precisely the same viewers, although there is a considerable overlap.
Sure. And going back to some of the specific pieces we were talking about, the other one I thought was really interesting was the driverless cars piece. And the first thing I was interested in looking at that, and I suppose the peanut one, is how much of the long stuff in the magazine is written by FT writers and how much is from external people, and what are the differences you experience?
So both the driverless trucks piece and the peanut piece are by FT staffers.
Sure.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the FT has an amazing correspondent of networks, so we do take advantage of that where we can, and it's great because it means it could be someone in San Francisco, or actually David is in New York, or all over Asia. But we do use freelancers as well. I think with freelancers, it's always a question of finding an area that's not treading on someone who's on staff's beat, and finding a story that's, you know, compelling and different enough that I haven't seen it anywhere else. I mean, with the daily newspaper reporters, obviously I'm following their stuff all the time, so I can say, oh, that was a really interesting line. So I think it's harder for freelancers because I don't know their stuff. I can't say, oh, explore that avenue a bit more, because I'm not seeing it every day. But the ones who have done really successful things for me are the ones who come with just an unusual idea and then flesh it out and drill down on how they're going to do it and how they're going to structure it. And yeah, we do use them.
Sure. And what I thought was interesting with the truckers piece was, this area of driverless cars is getting a lot of coverage across all sorts of media. With something, and you've clearly taken a particular area looking at truckers and looking at their stories. Was that a deliberate idea to try and find a kind of way into this that is both powerful and human, but also kind of distinct to?
Yeah, I mean, Leslie Hook, who wrote that, again, another great FT reporter, so she covers Uber and driverless cars and a lot of that sector, and she's written about it extensively. And she came to me with the trucks idea, and we just thought it was great because, as you say, it is that story, but it's just that kind of distilled approach to it. And it was just after the election, and obviously there are something like 3 million truckers in America. I mean, it's a colossal number, and the votes of truckers just tallied almost exactly with the popular vote in the US election.
That histogram's extraordinary.
Yeah, we had some charts with it, and so we were just like, these are the people who are voting for Trump, and their industry is about to be completely turned on its head. And on the one hand, you've got the White House talking about how great the truckers are and how wonderful everything is, and on the other hand, you've got Silicon Valley just working to get these people out of their cabs, and what does that mean, and what does it mean for all of the, not just the people in the actual vehicles, but the truck stops all over America, entire towns set up around this microculture.
Did you consider the possibility of kind of doing a journey element with that? Because one thing I thought would have been wonderful to be in the cabs as they were driving and kind of crossing ground and things. Were there access issues?
No, I mean, it's interesting you say that. There was a plan at one point for a sort of video element to go along with it, of the kind of dashboard camera, and it just became a bit difficult for technical reasons as far as I can remember. I mean, Leslie, the writer, did actually go out in some of the trucks, but I think she also just had such rich colour from being among them at the truck stops and sort of exploring their cabins and stuff, that it was just a question of not everything can go in.
Sure. and with, I mean, how long is that? It's about 4 or 5?
I think that was probably 4,500.
What are with length? What is the kind of bracket for the bigger pieces that you go between?
I mean, I'd say most of our main features come in around 4.
Okay.
Between 4 and 5. Or 3 and 5. We have occasionally extended that if it's a massive investigation or a particularly special piece in some way. We can do a bit more. Yeah. But sadly, we're never going to get to New Yorker length. I'd have to clear the whole mag.
Sure. And do you see, with a piece like that, with kind of moulding the human, as both the pieces we're discussing, they have human stories and a kind of phenomenon element they're looking at. When you're working with a writer, how do you get them to kind of fuse? Because that's what I find is essentially the magic of magazine writing, that you need human and powerful stories that speak to a broader truth or phenomenon. But I find dovetailing those elements is often very challenging. And how do you...
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I think that, we spend a lot of time talking about structure. Yeah. And in both of those pieces, actually, and I don't think David and Leslie would mind me saying this, there was a certain amount of restructuring that went on, because they're both great reporters. They've got these fantastic voices and they know their beats inside out. So they had all of the analysis. It's just working out how to get the two working together. And it is a bit of a dance. I think one of the things that we see most often is people who file stories, not either of these two, where there's just not so much of a human voice. Quotes are quite truncated. If you're more used to working in a daily news format, you don't necessarily feel the freedom to just give someone's story rein in their own words. And that is quite often an editing note that myself or someone on my team will go back with, because... To
sort of shrug off the traditional news structure.
Yeah, just to explore people's voices and let them talk in their own words. And that is the joy of having more space. It is the old show not tell thing. Yeah. And I think that there's a reason that that's an adage that's constantly being quoted.
It's interesting you mentioned as a touchstone some of the American stuff, which I think with everyone we speak to in British journalism doing this kind of thing, that they are looking at what goes on in America. With the editing process that happens at the magazine, how many rounds, how many drafts? Is it American or British in...
I think it's probably a hybrid of the two. I mean, it depends very much on...
Because you must know the full American magazine style.
I do, yeah. I mean, I've existed in both ecosystems, and I'd say that we're probably somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Some, we do a fair few rounds with some of our pieces. I mean, not everyone. Some people, some writers, they're great. They file it. It's pretty much word perfect. We just have to do a fact check. But yeah, often it's not at all unusual to do 3 or 4 rounds of things. And I think that can be tricky, but I think that most writers actually really enjoy it because they like being able to drill down into it, and they like being able to argue their case, and they definitely do argue their case, and I'll argue right back, but it always comes out somewhere, or normally comes out somewhere that we're both happy with. So
So we already talked a little bit about the process of editing and the sort of the toing and froing, but I think one thing that our listeners are really fascinated by are what people's daily lives and jobs actually entail. How the pitching and commissioning processes look through your eyes.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I mean, I always prefer to get pitches by email rather than by phone, because inevitably I always feel so sorry for people who call me up and I'm sort of in a meeting or on deadline and there's no way I can address something that they've obviously been thinking about for ages. So, when an email lands, I suppose what we look for is something that's not too long, but that is enough to get across an idea of how the story might go. I actually quite like it when people pitch 2 or 3 ideas in an email. I'd say not more than that, because then you sort of think, well, do you actually want to write any of these? But if it's a couple of different ones, then, sometimes it'll be someone who I'm quite interested in as a writer, but they'll happen to pitch on something I've already got on the schedule, and then you feel bad.
And do you see that as the beginning of a conversation, or do you like them to sort of say, this is the story that I'm pitching, these are the people that I'm thinking of speaking to, and this is the structure I'm thinking? Or do you sort of say, okay, that's an interesting concept, but let's go away and give me more?
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's an idea I'm interested in, or a person who I'm interested in getting to write for the magazine, it's definitely like the opening step. It will then be a question of, let's find a good time to talk, we'll discuss it, probe possible angles, have a think. I mean, it's also it's the boring stuff that no one wants to think about, but like the logistics of it, is there travel involved? Like, am I going to have to think about travel and accommodation costs on top of other things? What about photography? And actually that's something that I think is so important for a magazine. Like, if there's not a strong visual, if you don't come thinking about what's the photography going to look like, could we illustrate it? Is there a video component? Those are things that haven't traditionally necessarily been something that writers have had to consider. But I so appreciate it if someone says to me, there's this, this and this, because that for a magazine is how most of our stories work, and if there's no pictures, then that does make it harder. But yeah, then we'll have phone conversations, we'll follow up. Often they'll like draft a little something out for me, and I'll go back to them and say, yeah, this is spot on, or try a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. It's definitely a long process.
And are you quite a collaborative team? Like, would you take a sort of a big feature idea to other people in the magazine, or is it sort of quite sort of focused?
No, we're very collaborative. So we all kind of muck in on everything, really, on my desk, and also with the visual teams. I mean, we're quite a small team, so it's all hands to the pump quite a lot of the time. And actually, I've always found it to be the case on every magazine I've worked on, that often the best headlines and the best ideas come from bits of the team that aren't necessarily the editors. People's minds work in different ways, and sometimes if we've been stuck in thinking about every word of a 3,000, 4,000 word story, we can't see the wood for the trees, and someone on the production desk will just be like, oh yeah, this is what it is, and you're like, oh yes, of course, or some such.
And obviously, you hope that a story sort of goes from pitch to edit and then out in the magazine sort of relatively seamlessly. But as we all know, things can go wrong, and also the final mix in each individual magazine is quite important. So how many of these stories do you have sort of on the go, kind of maturing like fine wine before they're ready to be sort of put in?
We always have quite a few. I have sort of recurrent nightmares about waking up, and like I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my goodness, we've only got 2 stories in. What happens if X and Y? So I'm definitely someone who likes to have a bit of a backlog, because as you say, the news changes, suddenly that wipes the story out, or someone gets ill, or the photos don't come in. And so we have a lot, so we switch it up. I mean, we'll be planning sort of 6 weeks, 2 months in advance. And of course things will change, and if a new story happens and we can react quickly to it, which sometimes we can, because we do have quite short deadlines for a magazine, we do sometimes rip the book up. But at other times it will just be I feel that this week this mix is slightly better. But everything goes in eventually.
Yeah, it's nice to have a couple of timeless pieces just in case.
Exactly.
One thing that we try and do the podcast with everyone, not just yourself, is to talk as frankly as possible about money, and feel under no obligation to answer any of these questions. But what do you tend to pay for freelancers?
Well, our rates slightly vary depending on, the experience of the freelancer, whether they've done stuff for us before, their background, etc., etc. And to say around 40p a word is our sort of starting.
Okay.
Starting
Because
rate.
I mean, again, this is not only a comment germane to the FT, but what we often find speaking to, British publications who say like we want to do really ambitious, long form work, but the amounts they're paying are a sort of quarter of what the Americans pay for this sort of thing. I mean,
the exchange rate is not in our favour right now.
Yeah.
I would say it's tricky because it's a tough industry, and none of us have very much money. I don't think that's a secret to anyone listening. If it's an amazing story and we really want it in the magazine, and there's we'll try everything we can to work it out. I mean, without naming names because these stories haven't gone in yet, but I currently have freelance writers who are doing big international trips for me, doing big essays, doing long form stuff. It's not a question of we will never fund that, because we do quite routinely. But
there's a distinction between having budget for expenses and ambitious reporting and the actual amount paid for the work itself. And it seems, again, this is not exclusively related to the FT, but talking to British editors, often it seems like the idea that you would pay someone $2 a word to write a magazine story is considered sort of outrageous, or that, whereas it seems almost a sort of British notion of what this kind of work is actually worth. Almost,
Yeah,
because British newspapers do spend big money on stuff, right? Like on various other bits of the package, and
I think that's true. I think some pay more money than others. It depends. It depends who you are, and obviously some value different things. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. People get paid less here than they would in the States, and that is a cultural difference, and it's something that. It's tough, like it's really difficult for people. I do understand that, but I also would say that we do, there are people who will pay £1 a word for, but it sort of depends on, how well I know that story. I mean, how well I know their work, how impressed I am with the idea. We do a lot of work with our writers to make sure that we're kind of everybody's happy. And I would never want to say no to an amazing story because we couldn't pony up the money, but equally. It is a difficult time. So,
and when you're working with people internally, do you have a sense of how much of their sort of time you can take for a magazine project, or taking away from their internal stuff?
It's tricky. I was listening to one of your podcasts, and someone was saying, "Oh, they're all expected to do this," and I was like, "Yes, that is true at the FT as well." I mean, but we do, obviously the most in-demand writers are in demand everywhere across the paper, so it is a bit of a case of joining the queue. I mean, the FT is very supportive of the magazine. They like the writers to do these long form pieces. They like the fact that these are the ones that, go on, do very well, have evergreen lives online. And we do find that if we do a bit of planning and we talk to the desk editors, and the writer is quite frank with his or her immediate line manager, we can generally carve out the time.
And at the same time, again, mentioning no names, are there people within the paper who would like to write the magazine stuff but just can't really do it? Does that?
No,
because again, without mentioning about other publications, but I know that there are other media organizations where like the sort of you get this situation where the magazine silo thinks that like that people outside can't do this, and it can create quite difficult.
No, I mean, we're in the opposite situation to that. We have no staff writers on the magazine. We don't have anybody who's just assigned to us. Everybody we use at the FT has another job doing something else. And as a result, we literally use everyone from the editor on down. I mean, I'm really lucky in that I don't feel there's anyone in the building who I can't approach. It may be that they say, no, I'm writing a book, or no, I'm doing this, but there's no sense of, oh no, he would never do a magazine piece.
Okay.
I don't think I found that.
Or is there a sense of what I was kind of saying is people who maybe can't do it, who just can't make that shift across?
What you mean from a writing perspective?
Yeah, from a writing perspective.
I think there are some people who are more. Obviously, there are some people who are more natural at it than others and more relaxed with it. And there are definitely writers at the FT who, they could pitch me on anything, and I would say yes, because they're so talented that I know it will be great. And there are definitely people who I work a bit more with. But actually, sometimes I do find that the ones where you've worked really quite hard to get it into shape are quite rewarding, because then the next time they come back, it's a bit less work, and then you've got a whole other great writer.
You've talked a little bit about how international the FT is, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that international mix in your online readership and what sense you have of how international it is, where your readers are reading from, and how they're reading, and sort of through which medium?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's massively changed over the last decade is analytics. Like, I remember actually back when I was working on blogs on the Times, being obsessed with the stats, but it was very rudimentary, and I'm still obsessed with the stats. Like, I had to give up our analytics program for Lent because I was literally just watching people's things. But it is amazing because, you know, the one that we have, which I'm sure is replicated in many other places, is, you know, you really can tell people coming from social media. Are they coming from the US? You can see the spike in the morning when the US wakes up. You can see Asia going to bed. Like, you can literally track everything. And that is, I mean, you don't want to become as obsessed with it as I was at various points. You know, it's just one bit of the information. But it is incredibly useful to have that. And we do think about that. And it does, you know, we're just very aware that we have all of these different audiences. So if we're going to write something on, you know, internal fighting in the Tory party, which we often do, you know, we just are aware that we need to cast that for an international audience. And why is that relevant for people outside of Whitehall? It doesn't necessarily limit what I would commission, but it does limit how we would present it.
And if you know that a particular story is likely to get sort of a lot of traction online, or through social media, how important is that in the kind of commissioning process? Are you thinking, you know, this is going to play really well on social media, and so it'd be good to have that as part of the mix, or does it not really inform your commissioning?
No, we definitely do think about that. I mean, I wouldn't say that we necessarily always know. It's quite hard to tell. You know, you get the sleeper hits where you're like, oh God, I never expected. So for example, there was an amazing piece last week, 2 weekends ago, on the upcoming Catalan referendum. And it was beautifully written, really great writer. I have never been retweeted by more Catalan regional activists in my life, and I never saw that coming. I didn't think, oh, this is going to be a social media thing. So I think that we always do think about it. A lot of planning goes into how we present our stuff on social media. But I wouldn't commission something just because I thought it was going to be a surefire hit, because that does sometimes backfire, and you don't want to commission a bad piece just for that reason. Then you fall a little bit into clickbait territory.
And do you find that your long form pieces from using the analytics, what's the readership like for online versus the shorter piece? I mean, for long form versus the shorter pieces, and is there sort of a difference in readership or appetite at different times for different lengths?
I think our long form pieces do. In fact, I know our long form pieces do really, really well online. I mean, the things like time spent on page, you know, there's a piece that's just gone up yesterday, and there's like, readers are spending like 4 minutes on page with it, which is a really long time. And you can track how far down they get, and they're all pretty much getting like 75% of the way down, which when you average it out means that most of them are, you know, probably getting pretty much to the end. I mean, it's actually been great as someone who loves long form journalism and has made her career in it. Like, it's hugely validating to be able to see on these analytics things that there is an appetite for this, that people read it, that they're reading it on the tube in the morning, they're reading it on the tube in the evening, you know, and they go the whole way down it, and they will spend a lot of time. They'll really engage with it. And that's, I mean, yeah, as I say, it's very rewarding for us, and explains my obsession with the stats.
And very rewarding for me, because that was precisely the answer I was angling for.
Good.
I know we'll have a lot of people who are regular listeners who love long form, and will be delighted to hear you say, as someone who knows the stats intimately, that there's a lot of appetite for it.
I realise I forgot a question from earlier on. You mentioned briefly earlier your the kind of time cycles and the deadline structure. Could you talk a bit about how that works in terms of just what the rhythm of production
closes? Yeah. We go to press on a Wednesday morning for a Saturday publication, so it's quite a short window. And I think actually a lot of the other UK magazines have a slightly longer one. So sometimes I feel that that's a big advantage. Although, so for example, when Margaret Thatcher died, we were able to rip up that mag and put in an essay by Simon Sharma on that, and that was great. Of course, the person has to die at the right time on the right bit of the week, so that's not always the case.
A previous guest on the podcast, Jonathan Beckman of 1843, said that his first job was working on the books desk at the Observer, and he said there could only be a crisis there if Philip Roth died on a Friday evening.
Yeah, that is, I do sometimes think like that. And of course there have been times where we've published something and something's happened in the intervening 2 days, and you're just like, ooh. But that's part of magazine journalism, you just have to put up with it. But no, so it's quite tight. We have a sort of mad beginning of the week where we're rushing to get all of the pages to press, and then the end of the week's a little bit more friendly for commissioning, editing, talking through visual ideas, working out how the next month or so is going to play. So that's the kind of, if you catch me on a Thursday or Friday, I'm likely to be significantly more relaxed, I'd say.
And how big is the team?
There are 12 of us across the desk. That's the visual production and editors. So not as big as the New York Times magazine.
Yeah.
So I look at their masthead in envy.
Well, it's interesting actually. I was on this writer's residency earlier in the year in the US, and at the place they had all these National Geographics from the 60s, and I looked at the masthead and I was like, what on earth?
Yeah, you
are
just
people
keep going.
doing?
I know.
We wanted to ask as well, actually, a question about like, particularly with the financial crisis and with all that happened, did you feel that the sort of the FT coverage that wasn't hard news, so the weekend paper, the weekend magazine, How to Spend It, did it have to undergo some kind of existential thing? When the fact that How to Spend It still sort of existed, was there ever any?
To be honest, you're not asking the right person because I wasn't here then.
Sure.
So I don't know, but How to Spend It's a very valued part of the FT's publications.
Yeah.
The financial crisis, the FT rose quite well to that challenge. I think it won Best Paper that year, as it should have done. But I have to say I didn't arrive until a couple of years after that fact. So, yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you for taking the time and for such fascinating answers.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.
Much appreciated.
Okay, bye.
It's us again with a swift update from our lives. Kassia, what have you been up to?
Very little, except for scrupulously colour coordinating and highlighting my notes for the next 2 chapters. There's not much writing being done, but the notes are looking beautiful.
I can confirm that because we're currently in Cassia's writing shed, which is decked with coloured stickers. I have been doing additional reporting for my book as I wait to get the edit back, so filling in the gaps with that. And waiting to hear about covers. No firm word on that. So just ticking along really.
Other highlighter sticky aficionados will be pleased to hear that I bought a multi-pack of 1,400 highlighter stickies recently, so I won't be running out anytime soon.
We'll see Kassia through at least the next 10 days.
This has been Always Take Notes. It is hosted by me, Cassie Sinclair, and by Simon Aiken.
Our producers are Olivia Cralin, Ed Kiernan and Liz Davies.
Music is by Jess Danheiser. Social media is looked after by Zara Hankier, and our graphic design was done by James Edgar.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on Twitter at Take Notes Always, and our website is alwaystakenotes.com.
And please do stop by iTunes and give us a review. It really helps, and we'd be very grateful.